We're talking about the Nigerian Civil War. And look, this wasn't just some conflict. It was a profound tragedy. We're talking over 2 million lives lost, leaving scars that, honestly, are still there today. So in this explainer, we're going to dig into the big question. How does a nation, fresh off celebrating its independence, just descend into such horror?
So, to really get a handle on the human cost of this war, we're going to do something a little different. We're not going to start at the beginning. No, we're going to start at the end, with the absolute catastrophe that made the entire world stop and pay attention.
Yeah, look at that number. Over 2 million people dead between 1967 and 1970. But here's the thing that's so hard to wrap your head around. These weren't just soldiers, battlefield casualties. A huge, staggering number of them were children. They were victims of a famine so catastrophic, it shocked the entire planet.
And you have to understand, this famine wasn't some tragic accident of war. Not at all. A Nigerian delegate at a peace conference actually stood up and made the government's position chillingly clear. Starvation, he said, wasn't a byproduct of the war. No, it was a weapon. A deliberate, calculated weapon.
So how on earth did it get to this point? How does a country that was seen as this symbol of post-colonial hope fall so far so fast? Well, to find the answer, you have to go right back to the very foundation of Nigeria. You see, modern Nigeria wasn't built on solid ground. It was built on these deep, deep tensions, actual fault lines that were, you could say, engineered long before independence was even on the table.
So let's go back to 1914. You've got the British colonial governor, right? And for reasons that were purely about making his life easier, administrative and economic convenience, he just smashes together two vastly different territories. This wasn't a union of people who wanted to be together, not even close. It was a forced marriage of hundreds of distinct cultures that had almost nothing in common. And this merger, as you can imagine, created an immediate fundamental clash of values. I mean, think about it. In the north, you have the House of Fulani with this deeply conservative top-down Islamic hierarchy. Then you look to the southeast, and you've got the Igbo people, who lived in these decentralized, almost democratic villages where your status was all about what you achieved, not who you were born to. These were, literally, two completely different worlds forced into a single box.
And the way the British chose to rule just made everything worse. It poured gasoline on the fire. In the north, they used what they called indirect rule, working through the local emirs and deliberately limiting Western education. But in the south, it was a totally different story. Missionaries came in, built schools, and the Igbo people especially just embraced it. They jumped at the opportunity. So you get this new class of doctors, lawyers, civil servants, and they start migrating all over the country for work. Now that's great for them, it creates prosperity, but you can bet it also fueled some serious resentment from other groups.
Okay, so you've got all these tensions just simmering under the surface, right? Decades of them. Well, they were about to boil over. One single, incredibly violent year, 1966, was about to push Nigeria right past the point of no return.
And when it happened fast. A brutal chain reaction. It starts in January. A group of junior officers, most of them Igbo, stage a coup. They assassinate key northern leaders. Now, they claimed it was for the good of the nation, but almost everyone saw it as an Igbo power grab. So what happens? In July, a bloody counter-coup by northern officers. And that unleashed something far, far more terrifying. Widespread, organized violence against Igbo civilians.
And we need to be really clear here. These weren't just random riots. No, these were organized massacres. The word for it is pogrom. Across the entire north of Nigeria, Igbo civilians were literally hunted down and killed in the streets. It was a campaign of terror, and it forced over 1 million Igbo people to flee for their lives, abandoning everything, their homes, their businesses, to run back to their ancestral homeland in the east.
So just imagine that, a massive refugee crisis, and this overwhelming belief that the state, the country of Nigeria, could not or would not protect you. What do? Well, the eastern region took the most drastic step you can possibly imagine. They decided to leave, to declare their own independent nation.
For the Igbo people who dominated the East, this wasn't about ambition. It was a desperate act of self-preservation. After being targeted and massacred across the north, they felt like their only chance for survival was to break away and create their own sovereign state, the Republic of Biafra.
The response from the Nigerian federal government was swift and absolutely brutal. They flat out refused to recognize Biafra, and immediately they clamped down with a complete naval blockade. This wasn't just a political move, it was an act of economic warfare, and it was the very first step toward the mass starvation we talked about. Just over a month later, the shooting started. The war had begun.
And this thing went global, fast. Suddenly it wasn't just a civil war, it was a proxy war. You had the UK worried about its massive Shell BP oil interests arming Nigeria. The Soviet Union jumped in on Nigeria's side too because they were ideologically against any secessionist movements. But then, on the other side, you had France secretly arming Biafra, partly because they wanted to poke the British in the eye and undermine their influence. It became a whole geopolitical chessboard.
And that blockade, it worked with horrifying efficiency. Food couldn't get in, medicine couldn't get in, and a catastrophic famine began to take hold. And for really the first time in history, the images of that famine, of starving children, their bellies swollen from that protein deficiency disease, kwashiorkor, were broadcast directly into living rooms around the world. This was one of the very first televised humanitarian disasters, and people had never seen anything like it.
You know, this crisis actually changed the world of humanitarian aid forever. There was a group of French doctors working in Biafra, and they felt totally constrained by the strict neutrality of the Red Cross and other groups. They thought, wait a minute, it's not enough to just treat the victims. We have a duty to bear witness, to speak out against this injustice. And that powerful conviction, well, it led them to found a brand new organization you've probably heard of, Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders.
But eventually, the fighting did end. That, however, was not the end of the story, not by a long shot. This war left deep, deep wounds on the Nigerian psyche, wounds that, you could argue, have never really healed.
After nearly 3 years, outgunned, totally surrounded, with its people literally starving to death, Biafra surrendered. The Nigerian head of state at the time, Yakubu Gowon, gave this now famous speech where he declared, "No victor, no vanquished," trying to set a tone for reconciliation.
But, noble words can only do so much. They couldn't erase the scars. The death toll was just immense. And this incredibly painful debate about whether the starvation campaign amounted to genocide, that debate continues to this very day. And what's really crucial to understand is that the memory of that war and the feeling of being marginalized that came after it, that directly fuels the separatist movements you see in the region today. The past is very much present. And that, right there, is the essential truth of this whole conflict. The Nigerian Civil War isn't just some historical event you read about in a textbook. It's a living memory. It's something that continues to shape the nation's identity, its politics, and all of its unresolved questions about what it means to be a unified country. It's a powerful reminder that lines drawn on a map for convenience by a colonial power can create fault lines in the earth that tremble for generations to come.